What's up, my fellow Shield Brothers? Shield Brother 6 here with another weekly dose of history. And today on this March 9th, we're going to be talking about two specific big events of the American Civil War that happened on March 9th. The first of them happened in 1862, which will be the Battle of Hampton Roads. The second will be in 1864, which was Ulysses S. Grant being appointed commander of the Union Army by President Lincoln. So with that, let's get started on this very important day of the American Civil War. The Battle of Hampton Roads. So the Battle of Hampton Roads, which is often referred to as a better known name, which you guys probably recognize, the Battle of the Monitor in Merrimack, or Virginia, which is the Battle of the Ironclads, a very revolutionary battle that took place. This is the most noted and arguably the most important naval battle of the American Civil War, from the standpoint of the development it would have on the world navies. It was fought over 2 days, March 8th and 9th in 1862, at Hampton Roads, which is a roadstead in Virginia where the Elizabeth and Nansemond rivers meet the James River, and just before it enters the Chesapeake Bay, which is adjacent to the city of Norfolk, which is a very important port for Virginia and the Confederate States. This battle was part of the effort of the Confederacy to break the Union blockade on that port, because it was cutting off all international trade between Norfolk, Richmond, and international countries who were helping them. So this was the duty of the Confederate ships at the time to break this blockade so that they might regain trade and movement. The battle. The Confederate fleet consisted of the ironclad ram Virginia, or Merrimack, which it was built from the remnants of the USS Merrimack, and several supporting vessels. On the first day of the battle, it was opposed by several conventional wooden warships of the Union Navy. On that day, the CSS Virginia was able to destroy 2 ships of the Federal flotilla, the USS Congress and the USS Cumberland, and it was about to attack a third ship, the USS Minnesota, which had run aground. But darkness fell and there was a falling tide, so Virginia retired to take care of her few wounded, but the wounded did include her flag officer Franklin Buchanan and repair the minimum battle damage that had been done to the ironclad ship. The ship was just annihilating the Union blockade, and on the next day it was planning to return to the grounded USS Minnesota and finish it off. However, the Iron Giants, determined to complete the destruction of the Minnesota, as I said, Catesby, Roger Jones, acting as captain in Buchanan's stead, returned the ship to the fray the next morning of March 9th. During the night, however, the ironclad Monitor, the Union ship, had arrived and had taken a position to defend the Minnesota. When Virginia approached the Monitor and intercepted her, the two ironclads fought for about 3 hours, with just rounds bouncing off each other's iron hulls, with neither being able to inflict any significant damage to the other. It was an outright stalemate. But this was a big deal because this was all iron ships just pummeling each other. Revolutionary new styles and warfare being forged right there. The result. The duel ended indecisively, the Virginia returning home at the Gosport Navy Yard for repairs and strengthening, and the Monitor went back to her station defending the Minnesota. The ships did not fight again, and the blockade remained in place. This battle would influence naval warfare for decades, even centuries to come, because the world was watching this battle and how these ironclad ships would do. And upon seeing such success, all of the powerful world navies at the time would take note of this. Because the world significance. So the major significance of the battle is that it was the first meeting in combat of 2 ironclad warships, as I said, the USS Monitor and the CSS Virginia. The battle received worldwide attention, and it had immediate effects on navies around the world. The preeminent naval powers of Great Britain and France both halted further construction of any wooden-hulled ships at the time, and other nations followed suit. They all ceased making wooden warships. The new type of warship, which was dubbed Monitor type, was produced based on the principle of the original. The use of a small number of very heavy guns mounted so that they could fire in all directions was first demonstrated by the Monitor, but soon became standard in all warships of all types at that time. Shipbuilders also incorporated rams, just like the CSS Virginia had, into the designs of warship hulls for the rest of the century after seeing success performed by the CSS Virginia against the Union blockade. So, you can see how this one kind of insignificant battle of the American Civil War would influence and change how combat would be fought in the water by all world navies from there on. Because we went from having cannons on each side of a wooden warship to having ironclad ships with guns in all directions, which we still use today. We still, even in World War I, World War II, we had, the destroyers with the guns in all directions. They were made of steel and iron. We still use those, different types. So you can see how this American battle influenced the world and its navies, which I think is very fascinating, because the battle itself for the war, the American Civil War, had very little effect. For the Union, it was kind of a strategic battle, a strategic victory, because they got to keep their Union blockade in place. For the Confederates, it was kind of a significant and moral victory, because they were able to keep their Confederate Navy in place, and they didn't have to. It wasn't destroyed, but they weren't able to gain trade again. But also, they had the moral victory that the ironclad wasn't sunk. So we went from this very relative victory to influencing the entire world. So let's continue. Ulysses S. Grant. On this day in 1864, President Abraham Lincoln signs a brief document officially promoting the then Major General Ulysses S. Grant to the rank of Lieutenant General of the U.S. Army. So this rank of Lieutenant General had originally been reserved only for George Washington, because it was held with such esteem over all other generals. But Lincoln needed this rank to be restored, because that way everyone could differentiate the general that was over all the generals, the head general of the Union command. So, tasking the future president of Grant with the job of leading all Union troops against the Confederate Army on this day in 1864. However, when he first wanted to restore this rank, it was not meant for him. But supervised by Lincoln, Grant would lead the Union Army to victory over the Confederacy ultimately. He was also twice elected president. Grant later led the Republicans in their effort to remove the vestiges and remnants of the Confederate nationalism and slavery. He was very adamant about that. So his promotion went on to help him become president twice. So let's talk about the promotion. So in 1862, Lincoln asked Congress to revive the rank of Lieutenant General in order to distinguish between the general in charge of all Union forces and other generals of equal rank who served under him in the field. Congress also wanted to reinstate the rank of Lieutenant General, but only if Lincoln gave the rank to Grant. Lincoln had other ideas, though, because at the time, Grant was known as a drunk and the butcher. So those are not two good qualities to have for your head general. But Lincoln preferred to promote the then commanding General Henry Wagner Halleck to lead the Union Army. The Union Army at the time had been plagued by a string of ineffective leaders and replacements and terrible losses in battle, so Lincoln was very worried and very on the fence about this whole decision, especially when having to give it to someone like Grant. But as much as he was reluctant to promote Grant and risk boosting the general's popularity, because at the time, Washington, D.C. was abuzz with rumors that many northern senators were going to consider nominating Grant instead of Lincoln at the 1864 Republican National Convention. So he was very reluctant to give Grant this promotion that would boost his favor and his popularity with the people and the senator. Although ultimately he would give the rank to Grant, because he would prove himself time and time again in many different battles and strategic victories. Because let's talk about that. Grant and Lincoln. So after Grant publicly dismissed the idea of running for presidency, Lincoln submitted to Congress's choice and agreed to give Grant the revived rank, because as soon as he realized he wasn't having any competition with Grant, he was more than willing to give him the rank. But as Lieutenant General of the U.S. Army, Grant was answerable only to Lincoln, which served to show their connection that they would soon forge. So, well respected by troops and civilians and senators, Grant earned Lincoln's trust and went on to force the South surrender in 1865, a year later. And down below you can see a picture of Grant and Lincoln together, and they would become very good allies and friends, often communicating and working very well together to crush the Southern Rebellion. Command. So he was promoted in march on the 9th in 1864, and Grant later confronted Robert E. Lee, trapping his army in their defense of Richmond, while courting a series of campaigns in other theaters at the time. In April of 1865, Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox, effectively ending the Civil War. Historians have hailed Grant's military genius, and his strategies are featured in many military history textbooks even today. And I personally believe also that Grant was a military genius. This man was stupendous with his command of forces, as well as with the loyalty of his everyday soldier, as well as his lower commands. He was great with communication, mobility of his army, as well as with defense. And offense. He was very good about turning the defense into a quick offense. So those things combined, Grant was a stupendous military leader. He was not only a people's man, but also a combatant and a good commander. So those things combined, I just believe also that he is a military genius. So after the war. After Lincoln's assassination, Grant became increasingly disillusioned by President Andrew Johnson's approach to Reconstruction and began to agree with these new radical Republicans. Elected president in 1868, he stabilized the post-war nation, creating the Department of Justice, and used the military to enforce laws on the former Confederacy and prosecuted the Ku Klux Klan. Grant strengthened the Republican Party in the South and signed 3 civil rights acts in law. In 1871, he created the first Civil Service Commission. Grant was a great president, although his cabinet members and associates were often plagued with conspiracy and manipulation. He was always known as honest. But all this stems from that promotion, because he had been depromoted to a lower rank below general because of his drunkenness and his ineffectiveness. But then he was later restored to general, and then major general, and then lieutenant general. So he made a great comeback, and he's just a great part of the Civil War that was it was a key point to the Union victory over the Confederacy due to his skill and his usage of the Union Army at the time. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Shield Brother 6 with another weekly dose of history. I hope you learned about something of the Civil War. I hope you enjoyed. If not, leave a dislike. If you did, leave a like. If you have a comment, a suggestion, or a concern, you can leave that down for me down below in the comment section. And as always, this has been Shield Brother 6, and I'll catch y'all next time.